Today is March 15th. Welcome to Big Book Daily. My name is Rob. I am an alcoholic. It's a thrill, honor, and joy to be here with you today as we journey through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Today we're going to be reading The Vicious Cycle, which is one of the next pioneers in AA's testimonies. We're going to be reading 219 through 221. And out of the 12 and 12, we will be journeying through Step 9, the bottom of page 85 to the top of page 86. Almost done with that chapter as well. So with all that, my friends, hope you're doing well this morning. I've got my cup of coffee. I woke up this morning. It's going to be a good day. Anyways, let's get to the good stuff. So in the Big Book today, we are on page 219, which would be the fifth story about the pioneers of AA. These are those who, in the early days, who ended up living the rest of their lives sober. So this one's called The Vicious Cycle, how it finally broke a Southerner's obstinacy and destined the salesman to start AA in Philadelphia. So we'll go ahead and get right to it. January 8th, 1938. That was my D-Day. The place, Washington, D.C. The last real merry-go-round had started the day before Christmas, and I had really accomplished a lot in those 14 days. First, my new wife had walked out, baggage, and furniture. Then the apartment landlord had thrown me out of the empty apartment, and the finish was the loss of another job. After a couple of days in dollar hotels and one night in the pokey, I finally landed on my mother's doorstep, shaking apart, with several days' beard, and of course, broke as usual. Many of these same things had happened to me many times before, but this time they had all descended together. For me, this was it. Here I was, 39 years old, and a complete washout. Nothing had worked. Mother would take me in only if I stayed locked in a small storeroom and gave her my clothes and shoes. We'd played this game before. This is the way Jackie found me, lying on a cot in my skivvies, with hot and cold sweats, pounding heart, and that awful itchy scratchiness all over. Somehow, I'd always managed to avoid DTs. I seriously doubt I ever would have asked for help. But Fitz, an old school friend of mine, had persuaded Jackie to call on me. Had he come 2 or 3 days later, I think I would have thrown him out. But he hit me when I was open for anything. Jackie arrived about 7 in the evening and talked until 3 a.m. I don't remember much of what he said, but I did realize that there was another guy exactly like me. He had been in the same laughing academies and the same jails, known the same loss of jobs, same frustrations, same boredom, and the same loneliness. If anything, he had known all of them even better and more often than I. Yet, he was happy, relaxed, confident, and laughing. That night, for the first time in my life, I really let down my hair and admitted my general loneliness. Jackie told me about a group of fellows in New York, of whom my old friend Fitz was one, who had the same problem I had, and who, by working together to help each other, were now not drinking and were happy like himself. He said something about God or a higher power, but I brushed that off. That was for the birds, not for me. Little more of our talk stayed in my memory, but I do know that I slept the rest of that night, while before I had never known what a real night's sleep was. This was my introduction to this understanding fellowship. Although it was to be more than a year later before our society was to bear the name Alcoholics Anonymous, all of us in AA know the tremendous happiness that is in our sobriety. But there are also tragedies. My sponsor, Jackie, was one of these. He brought in many of our original members, yet he himself could not make it and died of alcoholism. The lesson of his death still remains with me. Yet I often wonder, what would have happened if somebody else had made that first call on me? So I always say that as long as I remember January 8th, That is how long I will remain sober. All right, great stuff here, guys, as we're journeying through this new testimony. I definitely want to come back to this in just a minute. Okay, so out of the 12 and 12, we have been journeying through step 9, which is made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And in the last couple of days, we've been given these scenarios, of more often than not, people will receive our amends with grace and will appreciate that we came to them forthright and were honest. And most of the time, people will receive our amends and maybe even forgive us. But we also talked about the times where that does not happen, where we make those amends and we're not forgiven. And how, truthfully, making these amends isn't about receiving forgiveness for the other person. It's about cleaning our side of the street. It's about admitting our wrongs and only focusing on what we can control. And I always love the quote on page 85, but if we have prepared ourselves well in advance, such reactions will not deflect us from our steady and even purpose. In other words, we keep going. No matter what kind of reaction we might receive, we try to admit our wrongs, sweep our side of the street, and keep going, doing our part. And I apologize. I believe at the beginning of the episode, I said we were finishing off page 85. That is a mistake. We're reading the first paragraph of page 86 today. So with that, my friends, let's get to it. There can be only one consideration which should qualify our desire for a complete disclosure of the damage we have done. That will arise in the occasional situation where to make a full revelation would seriously harm the one to whom we are making amends. Or, quite as important, other people. We cannot, for example, unload a detailed account of an extramarital adventuring upon the shoulders of our unsuspecting wife or husband. And even in those cases where such a matter must be discussed, let's try to avoid harming third parties, whoever they may be. It does not lighten our burden when we recklessly make the crosses of others heavier. All right, so while this is fresh, there's a great specific example of how perhaps our amends, if we're not careful, can harm others. I've heard stories from many friends that with this one particular example that the 12 and 12 talks about, where they made their amends and hurt a lot of people and ended up getting in fistfights over it. So making those amends and being overzealous in that context was actually more destructive, more harmful than good. So in that case, you're not powerless. We can still make our indirect amends to make sure that we never hurt anybody like that again and live the kind of life where we don't want to do that. Those are the indirect amends, where we can still do good by other people. So even if you can't go to somebody directly, you can still do your part. But of course, I have to make sure that, I'm exhausting every avenue. And when there are occasions where I do need to make a direct amends, I can't shirk away from that. At least that's my goal when I try to do these steps. And going back to the big book real quick, The Vicious Cycle. By the way, it says how it finally broke a Southerner's obstinacy and destined this salesman to start AA in Philadelphia. So I'm a Philly boy, so go Flyers. So instantly that caught my attention. But anyway, please don't hold that against me. Anyway, right here, we see a friend, looks like, in AA that comes to our narrator here. And he says, I think I would have thrown him out, but he hit me when I was open for anything. And this person seems happy, joyous, and free. And this person helps our narrator to get into the fellowship. But what is really interesting and tragic is that this sponsor, Jackie, he was one of these tragedies. He brought the narrator in to the original members, yet he himself could not make it and died of alcoholism. Our narrator says the lesson of his death still remains with me, yet I often wonder what would have happened if somebody else had made that first call on me. So I always say that as long as I remember January 8th, That's how long I will remain sober. So 1, this is a cunning, baffling, powerful disease. And a friend of mine always used to add another word. It's patient. And what he meant by that is, it doesn't matter how much time you have. If we're true alcoholics, it can come back. If we're not working the steps, if we're not having that conscious contact with God as the Big Book teaches us to have. I've always heard the image, our disease is doing push-ups in the parking lot, just waiting. It's getting stronger, even though we're not drinking. It's getting stronger every day. And if we go back out and drink, or if we rationalize, premeditate, make the decision to drink, most likely the relapse is going to be even worse than it was before. And this poor man, I've heard stories of this, sponsors who eventually go back out for whatever reason. And it's a great reminder of how serious this malady is. I know in my own experience, it doesn't really matter how many years I have. I can still get that random thought, oh man, a beer would be really good right now. Out of nowhere sometimes. Sometimes it's after a bad day. Sometimes it's after a pretty good day. Actually, most of the time it's after a good day. Hot summer day. Or when speaking of hockey again, when I'm watching a hockey game, I always used to pair drinking with that. It'll still enter my mind. And when I have those thoughts, I get down on my knees and I say, Father, your will be done. I cling to my higher power. And if it continues to be a pervading thought, then I call somebody, or I try to hit a meeting or do what I've got to do to get my mind off of it, or try to help another person working these steps. It is a cunning, baffling, and powerful disease. And it'll still whisper in my ear every now and then, hey, why don't you have a drink, Rob? You've been sober for a while. You're not an alcoholic. Maybe you were just depressed before. How cunning, baffling, powerful, and patient our disease is. And then the second thing I love about this testimony is, our narrator says, so I always say that as long as I remember January 8th, that is how long I will remain sober. A very close friend of mine in a fellowship, he says, always remember. I need to get that tattooed on my arm or something. Always remember. And I think about that every day. Always remember that day that I've shared with you guys, where I was caught in all my lies. My wife confronted me about 3 a.m. I'd have passed out drunk the night before. And she threatened to leave. Always remember the guilt and shame, but remember it objectively, right? Don't beat myself back up over it. But remember that day and how it felt, so that when that idea, that temptation to drink comes, you go, no, I am not living another day like that. For me, that day was October 14th, many years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. And I never want to go back. I never want to be that kind of person again. If I think about that, that quells the urge to drink. And that's exactly what this narrator's doing, or he's remembering January 8th. All right. So that's all we have for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I don't speak on behalf of AA, NA, Al-Anon, any other sect or denomination. I am just a friend in recovery, a grateful recovering alcoholic. And I'm so grateful you're in the lifeboat of recovery with me. I hope you all have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow.